This afternoon on the agenda we have two sessions, but really it's one long session rolled into one, and we're starting off with a look at effectiveness, which is probably the most important subject in the whole industry right now. And then after that, Catherine McLeod is going to showcase some great creativity, and it's quite appropriate that they should be so closely linked because creative effectiveness is coming firmly onto the radar now as yet another thing that we should all worry about. So, but at the end of the session at 4:30, there's going to be drinks and food outside, so I hope that you can all stay as long as possible. And before all of that, we're going to have a look at addressability and how that can be used in Canada. And to join us for that, we have Jakob Nielsen, who's the CEO at Finecast, and Paul Ranger, the VP Technology Sales for Strategic Accounts at Cadent. And they're going to be interviewed by Justin Lebon, who you met earlier. He's the Director at Mediatel Events.
You two sit here.
What do you want? Why don't you do the first one?
I've just realised one of my life dreams of coming on stage to Whitesnake. Here we go again. That was amazing. And I also picked the song because it's Here We Go Again, Addressable TV, which is a bit unfair to Addressable TV, but it's Here We Go Again in Canada, talking about a medium that has not progressed in a way that we sort of anticipated. And we're going to start off a little bit with the landscape for Addressable TV. And Paul, you're going to start us off here. You can introduce yourself when you answer the first question, but let's just start defining, for this purpose of this discussion, what is it we're talking about here?
Yeah, so Paul Ranger from Cadent. We provide the enabling technology for Bell and Rogers and Chorus to do their dynamic ad insertion up here and across Europe and the US as well. So from our perspective, being an enabling technology company, addressable TV from our perspective, I break down into two parts. One is the addressable part, which is really ad insertion or ad replacement targeted in a data compliant way or privacy way, using audience segments driven by any first or third party data that is verifiable, preferably on authenticated streams, measurable, and ideally with some ROI analysis as well. But the other part of it, I think, is the premium part, which is addressable TV around premium content. So premium content being content which is created to be sympathetic to advertising fitting in, whether it's sports events where they have breaks, or whether it's drama where they have natural cliffhangers going into the break. It's that kind of content. What it's not is my 9-year-old son playing soccer and uploaded to some content video sharing site. It's not a video pane in a browser while I'm reading whatever's happening in the UK at a particular point in time, which is normally fairly depressing. It's none of those kind of things, nor is it automatically programmatic either. Programmatic has a role to play, but some people make the association with addressable and programmatic being hand in hand. Programmatic plays a small part in maximizing the overall yield of addressable moving forwards. And I think it's preserving the value associated with it from that perspective, which is going to enable us to push back on the FANGs, which seems to be in the main theme throughout all of the discussions.
You may have made it all complicated for everyone here with that description of addressable, just so you know. I'm a little bit confused, I'll be honest with you. So what we're going to discuss here is around the future of telly. There's been a lot written about it, actually. Even Mark Ritson, sort of a firm favourite of these sort of events, just wrote about it recently. And he believes that it's kind of the saviour, if you like, of broadcast telly, of linear telly. And Jakob, you also sort of subscribe to this too. Like, you believe that addressable is a little bit more than maybe what Paul has described there, and it's actually gonna save broadcasters, if you like.
Well, that's what Mark is saying, and I'm clearly not as smart as Paul, so I'll define it differently. Addressable TV is the notion of serving different ads to different households in different parts of the content on different devices. And if you start thinking about that in TV, that changes a lot. I'm the global CEO of Finecast, which is a Group M focused company where we focus on really opening up the opportunities for our clients all over the world on addressable TV. We're live in the UK, Australia. We're doing some cool stuff with Bell and Rogers here in Canada, and we are working on a lot of different markets as well. And our philosophy is, to answer your question, and why I like what Mark is saying in Australia, is forget advertising for a second. The way we watch TV has changed dramatically the last 10 years. And it's the same change wherever you are in the world. It might be in different levels, in different markets, but TV has never been as exciting as it is now. 10 years ago, we were sitting in our living rooms, we had limited content choices. If we were late for a program, we would miss that. And we might have to see the rerun 3 days later. Where today we have unlimited content choices. We have Apple spending $6 billion, we have Amazon spending $6 billion, we have Netflix spending $12 billion US dollars globally, we have AT&T, etc., etc. There's so much money going into professional produced, high premium quality content, which is a fantastic viewing experience. You have hardware like TVs that's better, you have but here's the complexity. You have choices of, you can watch TV via set-top box, via OTT devices like Roku, Apple TV, Chromecast. Even Samsung and LG are particularly strong in this area. You can watch TV that way as well. You can even watch it on game station like PlayStation and Xbox. So when people say TV is dying, it's changing, and it's tremendously exciting. But from an agency perspective, and if you think about advertising, we need to start engaging with audiences in this very, very, very fragmented world. But if you do that, where all this is underpinned by technology, there's tremendous amount of data associated with it. All of a sudden, to Mark's point, in Australia, the traditional broadcasters can start competing in a data, technology, professional produced content world that some of the FANGs have decided they're not going to invest in the same amount of quality content. And as a brand, who doesn't want to be associated with professional produced content, data-driven, household, postcode focused world? That's what we see everywhere.
So we're moving to an on-demand economy, obviously. What do you think will happen to linear next sort of 5 years? Is your outlook pessimistic?
I think the whole debate about linear and on-demand world, etc., will merge into one thing. I don't know what that one thing is called, but I think if you try to answer the question in the traditional world of where everything so far has been linear, I think it will stop to exist. Yeah. I think you will. That doesn't mean it's dying. Digital people love to say TV is dying. Linear is not dying; it's just changing. If you go and watch a hockey game here in Canada and you have your set-top box and you record it, or you pause it for just 1 second, then that's technically on demand and not linear. It's on demand linear. So you go into this world where it will be much more enabled by technology and data, and therefore if you're a broadcaster today, that's very, very exciting if you invest in the technology and the data and the new setup. If you don't do that, it's a missed opportunity.
Okay. So it's exploiting all this on-demand behavior with all the points that Paul made about the tech and the addressability and the targeting. So Paul, you've been in this market for several years. Very quickly, how has addressable progressed in Canada from your perspective?
So these things always take a little longer than everybody anticipates. We're still at the cusp of talking about IPTV 10 years down the road, and even those very progressive platforms on the cable side, still less than 50%. So the projections always take a little longer. Mm-hmm. I think we have made progress over the last 3 years or so, even though some of the discussions and some of the challenges that we face remain the same. There's a lot happening behind the scenes, but there is also a lot of different groups that we need to get aligned. So some of the challenges that we have in Canada are different from the challenges where addressable TV has become mainstream elsewhere. So Jakob mentioned the UK. The UK has the advantage that Sky has a very dominant position. It's fully vertically integrated. They have beyond 50% household reach in the UK. And therefore it's easier for them to drive the market from a solar basis.
Yeah.
It's only relatively recently that our technology's been rolled out at Virgin Media to extend the Sky AdSmart reach there. If you look at the US, which is obviously addressable, is pretty mainstream there now, they have the local inventory, so the BDU equivalents down there are able to build a business case themselves for enabling addressable TV. Obviously in Canada, we don't have the benefit of the BDUs owning any inventory. We don't have a dominant player. We've got 6 or 7 BDUs spread across the market, each with a relatively equal market share. So it's very difficult to achieve the scale. What we have now got is we're just on the cusp of enabling 2 BDUs to do addressable TV. So over the next few months, we should have addressable enabled across 25% of Canadian households, hopefully. Touch wood, fingers crossed. And that should give a critical mass that allows people on the buy side to start experimenting with addressable campaigns based on some of the knowledge that's been picked up in other regions. We've started to coalesce around audience segments with a normalized data set that allows the sell side to offer an addressable product offering that can be run across multiple BDUs. So we reduce some of the friction from that perspective. We're working with all of the different programmers, so Chorus, Rogers, Bell, and working closely with the buy side, with people like Jakob, to make sure that we are all fully aligned with regards to optimizing the system as best as we can.
You mentioned the US and other market opportunities and stuff, and I hope I can get this. That's the article, by the way, from Ritson I mentioned earlier, but I didn't show it. This here is US addressable TV in the US. Sorry, this is the size of the market, and I think this is a major problem for media owners in Canada, is the justifying the ROI of investing in it. And if you look at the US market here, it's very small when you compare it to the overall linear TV market, isn't it? You can see by the stats. And we look to the US as a sort of bastion of addressable, but it's fragmented, and even commentary from people who work in it is actually a complete shit show. Trust me, that's a direct quote. So how do you convince, imagine that extrapolated to the Canadian market, how do you convince the BDUs here to invest in this medium when that's going to be the size of the market?
Well, first of all, the problem is not them. The problem is that stat, which is completely wrong, because that's defining addressable TV just on linear addressable TV on traditional old set-top boxes. But if we believe just half of our philosophy that TV is OTT, TV is set-top boxes, TV is CTV, smart TVs, etc. Those numbers are much, much bigger. In the US, eMarketer, which this is where the stat comes from, they're saying next year OTT advertising spend is going to be next year $5 billion. So saying that addressable TV is 3.5, that doesn't make sense. And obviously, if you take all broadcasters all over the world, let's take UK as an example, and it will be the same here, is you have all the four broadcasters, they have their own apps on different OTT devices. So Channel 4 will have an app where you can go in and watch TV programs, Sky, etc., etc. So that's how they see addressable TV. So the numbers are way, way higher than you see here.
Yeah.
The other aspect of that is that in the US, if you're only counting linear, only really local inventory is enabled in the US. So whereas you talk about the US linear television advertising market being worth $60 or $70 billion, actually only about 15% of that is enabled for addressable TV. So what you're actually looking at is a stat that says 25-30% of the enabled inventory actually is being made addressable.
Yeah.
And if you look at what Sky are doing in the UK, that's actually a reasonable benchmark for the amount of inventory in a mainstream but still growing market.
In a market like Canada, you mentioned all this sort of OTT and the SVOD content. Does it make sense for sort of one provider to like hoover all that stuff up and serve it as one sort of addressable audience? Is it big enough for everyone to do it in a siloed way?
Yeah, that's not just for the Canadian markets. Is the 7th biggest market in the world.
It's still pretty big.
So it's a big market. So let's not underestimate that. I think the legacy history is you're asking competitors that has competed fiercely in the last 20 years to start working together in a certain way. You have sales teams on different things, and it's just that's very, very complex to make happen. And you have different companies, whether you're Roger, Bell, Chorus, etc.
Okay.
They use different technology components, and then all of a sudden you're saying, oh, 2 of you have to throw it out, and we just go with one of them to make sure you have one platform. I think that's going to be difficult.
Okay, so another area here is looking at effectiveness and improving clients' relationship with television. How does Addressable do that? Can you guys answer that question maybe with an example?
So I think that, putting the direct revenue to one side, one of the things that when we talk about addressable, we tend to focus a little bit too narrowly with regards to what it can potentially do. And obviously the revenue is the primary driver, but if you think about what we're trying to do as an industry in terms of responding to the threat of the FANG and the response to digital advertising, clawing marketing budget away from TV advertising. We need to enhance the user experience as much as we possibly can. So addressable advertising enables us to deliver more relevant ads to individual households, and therefore they seem less intrusive. Sky's recent study said that their channel tune away dropped by 48%, I think, for addressable inventory, which is indicative of the fact that they're finding it less intrusive. It enables the sell side to create new ad products. That may be ad sponsorship, it may be different ad loads around programming. It enables them to enhance their ability to package their service up to the end user. We've seen what Hulu have done with different packages around different levels of advertising being included. All of those are direct responses to the different threats that we have, whether it be Netflix and other SVOD players with their ad-free models. So we have to lower the ad load and make it feel less intrusive to the end user.
Yeah, if I look, I represent demand, right? If I give you, I think from our perspective is there's so many different use cases for advertisers. Because when you start being able to use data, you can start and activate against data. So not just a panel of research, but actually activate against data. You start creating a lot of opportunities. Opportunities is things like you can extend your reach. So everywhere in the world we see the same numbers, but if you take UK, and Nielsen will say the same in the US, but Barb in the UK are saying the last 2 years, 16 to 34-year-olds, commercial impact on linear TV has declined by 23%, 22.9%. So that means that if you're Coca-Cola or Mars, you can't reach that audience as well as you could in the past. So they came to us, Mars is a big client of ours, and came and said, we just want to do a reach extension campaign. And we were like, but that's not addressable TV. No, but you have integrated with all these different set-top boxes, all these different OTT environments, and now you can reach that audience that we can't reach on linear anymore. So that's one way you start having conversations. You also go out and you take automobile. We have Ford, BMW, Lexus, etc., Volvo, all the automobile clients spend with us on addressable TV, and it's a very simple value proposition. In most markets, depending a little bit, the US is a bit different, but most markets, if you take BMW as an example, the BMW franchise in the market will do the TV advertising and not the dealership in itself. Because in the traditional world, you can't do dealership target advertising. Now, all of a sudden, we were having a meeting with some of these automobile clients, and there were dealerships there and the franchise, and we said, but we can help you target your dealership in Manchester. And then all of a sudden, that dialogue between them and saying, oh, then we can take UK franchise money and give that back to the dealership, who now can start doing TV advertising. So that completely changed that dynamic. So there's so many different use cases, and we go out and get data from CMMI, which is the motor data in the UK. So we can tell them when do people have a new SUV they need to start. There's a new lease deal coming up, etc. So we get data from that. And for BMW, it's a fantastic opportunity.
So yeah, as you know, I'm a little crafty, so I actually went to a couple of brands and got some opinions for this panel. So Sam Taylor here, shameless plug, but he's on our advisory board, and he works for Insurance Products, one of the biggest in the UK. I think he's a client of you guys actually, isn't he, Jakob? And he says that this is the problem that clients have. They say it's too expensive, and his opening line is, the general view here is the effectiveness of addressable still held back by price. Normal TV is more efficient due to lower costs. How do you deal with that?
Well, Group M is loved and hated, and our agencies, because we write some big checks, but we also push everyone on prices. So that's a person who represents Group M who are saying the following. It's not, because if you look at what you're doing with the funnel or extended reach, if you can't reach people on linear and you have to reach them on the on-demand world, you will have to pay more money for that. And I'm just reminding you, I work for Group M. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is when you go down the funnel and you start doing more and more targeting and niche targeting, yeah, you will pay higher CPMs. That is a fact. And then thirdly, if we don't do that, we won't have the opportunities for our clients in the future, because broadcasters like Roger, Bells, etc., they have to invest millions in enabling this for us. So we have to pay for that. I'm not saying we're just paying everything with our eyes closed. We are pushing the prices, but there's a balance, because if you push too much, I think someone said it earlier, you just get less quality, and we don't want that. So it's a balance.
No. If you want cats on skateboards, you know exactly where to go, don't you? I've got another quote here actually from a Canadian marketer from VW, and she's explaining how TV is sold to her. And in Canada, she actually said at this point, it looks like we're waiting for the US to lead the change before we really commit. Why? How can we become leaders and massively adopt what is the future of TV? So she believes this is the future of TV, so you'll love that, Jakob. Do Canadians look south and maybe be a bit more reactive?
I think one of the challenges that we've had as an industry is that we haven't done enough to educate the buy side of the business, and this is why the partnership with Jakob is so important.
Yeah.
We haven't had the pull through to get the adoption of the addressable TV technology, and I think one of the things that somebody like Virgin should be looking to do is to take up the opportunity to start experimenting with addressable. We talk about addressable as though it's a swap linear out, addressable in. Addressable should be, it's not relevant for every single brand and every single marketing objective at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It should be something that complements whatever the linear strategy is and all the other media buys.
But it can't be like a clunky process, like a pilot. She did actually do it, but it just took a lot of time. It was inefficient. I think that was her point.
Well, I think that's one of the limitations of where you have a fragmented industry that we're trying to move away from, whereby we're trying to normalize all of the data sets. We're trying to create common audience segments across multiple sell-side and BDU platforms to really take the friction out as much as possible.
Demand is not the problem. We have more than 250 of our clients spending. Here in Canada, we have 4. We already hired 4 people. We invested up front in Canada. We have clients starting spend with us, even though the technology is not 100% there. So anywhere in the world, demand is not a problem. It takes a bit of time for someone to say, we've done traditional linear TV, now we need to have these opportunities with data and targeting. So we work a little bit on that, but that's not the problem. We could move faster. We have some fantastic relationship with Bell and Rogers, and you're doing some stuff, but Tim Hortons coffee here is good, and the food is good, and the weather is somehow reasonable, and life is good in Canada.
There is some low-hanging fruit that we could take advantage of. If we could turn on, the low-hanging fruit is the VOD DAI side of things. It's viewing that's already happening. We're not trying to change behavior. All that we're trying to do is monetize existing viewing. Technology is relatively straightforward to enable. We've already done 25% of subscriber households. A couple more BDUs, create national reach, and then she would have something that she could experiment with on a national basis.
So there is a willing and a desire to experiment with this stuff here in Canada. Have you seen that?
From a demand side, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are supply has been a challenge the last couple of years, but I will say we're seeing some very interesting stuff from Bell and Rogers, and it's coming. So we are at this inflection point where it will change. I'm very excited about what's possible.
I'm going to throw Jakob under the bus here. I saw him in his office about 6 months ago or something, and he came up to me and he said, "Oh, you're Canadian, aren't you, Justin?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Have you tried Tim Hortons?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he was like, "It's fucking awful, isn't it?" And I was like, so what he's saying now, I don't know how he's turned that around. Quickly, is there anyone who's got a question for these two guys while they're on stage? Jakob's come. Got one gentleman at the back there. There's a microphone coming to you. If you can make it brief, that would be amazing.
What would you say is the number one goal with addressable TV as far as, what's the benefit? What's the number one benefit?
Number one benefit of addressable?
From a demand perspective, you can answer the supply. The demand perspective is it gives you fantastic opportunities to target audiences in different ways. And the second part is, I think you have to accept that it's going in the direction on the on-demand world, which is much more fragmented and complex. It's not only the known players today, it will also be Disney+, HBO, Netflix, etc., that are coming up here with both SVOD and AVOD solutions. So TV, from our perspective, buying TV is changing a lot. So we have to get into this new world of on-demand world because that's where it's going.
Addressable marries the best of TV and all its communication power with all of the benefits of digital in terms of measurability and accountability. It's that sweet spot in between, which gives us a much stronger product offering to push back against the threats that we face.
Well, that is a brilliant way to end. I want everyone here to thank my two speakers here with a good, healthy round of applause. And
thank you.
No, thank you. And we'll bring back John on stage to wrap up the session.
Right. Okay. Well, next we've got our only panel of the afternoon, but it's a hugely important subject, and it's about increasing media effectiveness in the digital era. And to lead us through that, we have Grant Lariche, who is the managing partner at 80/20. Okay, well, while they're coming up, I may as well just give you a quick example of media effectiveness at its best. The IPA have an effectiveness award every year, and they gave their Grand Prix winner in 2018 to Audi UK. They had a campaign that focused on getting higher earning or higher spending consumers to focus on the technology of their new cars, and especially things like collision avoidance. And the effect over 3 years was that sales volume grew 3 times faster than the UK market as a whole for cars. They made an estimated £1.78 billion of incremental revenue over 3 years, and their return on media investment was £2.7 to every pound spent. So that's what happens when you do it really well. But anyway, so for our panel, as I mentioned, we've got Grant Lariche. He's the managing partner at 80/20, and he's going to lead us for the next 40 minutes.
Hello. All right. All right. Come on now, guys.
All right. Well, thank you, Justin, for picking that song. I gave it up to, he said, hey, what song do you want to select when you come up? And I said, I don't know, pick something. So that's what we got. So thanks, Justin. So this panel today is about improving the effectiveness in the digital era. So I want everyone to introduce themselves and we'll get right into it. Want to start with?
Sure. Marianne Resnack. I'm a senior media manager at Expedia Canada.
I'm Christy Painting, CEO of Wavemaker Canada.
Hi, Lauren Brown, CEO of Operative Ad Sales Systems.
Melissa Williams, I'm a Senior Director of Media at CIBC.
David Briefstein, I'm the Chief Client Officer at TV Squared. We're an analytics platform for measuring the efficacy of TV advertising.
Great. So let's kick off with how do we better, so I'll ask this to the entire panel, how do we better understand the short-term effects of TV and optimize? Want to go?
Me?
This is right for you.
Well, as I said, we're an analytics platform and we're sort of data agnostic. We work with brands, agencies, and media owners globally to take on one side inputs of spot airings or impression data for streaming, and then on the other side for the brands to pixel their website or take any first-party data from the advertisers. And we marry those two data sets, run a set of algorithms, and translate that into some visibility around the efficacy and surface up insights for driving optimization.
Cool.
So I'll just add, I actually found it peculiar that I was on this panel, and I guess it turns out we're sponsoring, so they needed to put me on the panel. But I think this is a topic that will be talked about for quite some time, and I don't think it's actually fully ready to be talked about because I don't think there's a lot of scale. And I think there's a huge opportunity to go beyond ratings-based advertising sales. And worldwide, it's a $100 billion opportunity. And Facebook and Google and now Amazon are winning that battle. But all the surveys, I know we're going to talk about, Buy Net and Field and the brand building, and TV is a great one-stop shop opportunity that's only been good at branding, and as you move towards lower funnel, it starts to break down. And the reason it starts to break down is because there's two fundamental issues. The media companies themselves are too fragmented. So the pieces where your product, which is awesome, and every customer I talk to says it's great, the inventory that it can sit on top of is so small that it doesn't get anyone's attention to pry those big dollars away and start funneling money into these TV companies. And it's mainly because the TV businesses have fragmented supply chains of tech stacks that only do one particular thing. They sell Nielsen only, they sell digital impressions only, and so if you want to sell a portfolio where I can get much more lower funnel activity and be that one-stop shop, I have to go across all of those. So the media companies themselves are too fragmented. And I think the second issue is that TV is always traded as a platform. And that platform was held together in the US. It's Nielsen, and then here it's Kantar and Numeris. And when you have people with multiple measurement that want to do different things that have never been done before, all of a sudden TV, the platform, starts to look like TV, the Confederacy, right? Where everyone's kind of doing their own different thing. And if I can't, buy TV as a cluster of companies and optimize across them, which is how it's done from a ratings perspective, then I'm not actually going to push more money into my lower funnel budget into that medium until they fix that problem. So it's two-pronged.
And I would argue that a lot of that is right. I mean, I think in Canada you've got enough consolidation amongst the television, amongst the broadcasters that you could probably cobble together that scale. I actually think the issue centers around inventory availability. You may be getting really good intelligence, which is telling you to optimize in a certain way, but that doesn't mean that you're able to do that on the fly if the inventory is not available. And we know with sort of the dearth of inventory and the way that it is traded, it's unlikely that you'll be able to react to that very quickly. Now, you might be able to react to it for your next campaign, which is still useful intelligence, but you're not necessarily going to be able to optimize really quickly. And I think it was Guy Yi who was talking about, digital has the advantage of at least giving the impression of control. And I think that's part of this conversation, is that, yes, okay, yes, I remember that. I must remember that for next time. But the objectives of the campaign might not be the same, and the target might not be the same. So, it's very difficult to continually apply that learning in a really smooth and usable way.
So I have to agree and disagree slightly. So we adopted TV Squared a few years ago, so we do use TV Squared. And in the US, we use quite a bit of set-top box data. So between the two, you kind of look at long-term and short-term impacts. And what we've seen is, digital is great at making those very quick decisions, but something like TV, I mean, we've talked a ton about, its long-term brand building capabilities. So from our perspective, we're not really looking to make very quick optimizations. We're looking at larger scale, how are different stations performing, day parts, genres, and optimizing in that way. And that's, TV Squared has been a great partner for something like that. In the US, where we have something like accessibility to set-top box, we're measuring down to an efficiency, and that is a lower funnel metric, if you will, but we're not, optimizing daily, weekly, monthly. We're looking longer term because, again, it's getting that shorter term measurement and being able to, optimize on our business, but not really at the level of digital. And I think there's a lot of power in that for something like TV, because you can measure it and optimize it on the same currency, if you will, so a transaction for us being e-com, but there's the long-term scale benefits of something like TV.
That makes a lot of sense to me. That's kind of how we approach planning to some degree. When you think about comms planning, it's about bringing those insights, using them on a macro level. So, yeah,
Sure. Melissa, I know you look at the entire kind of attribution across all channels. Are you looking at certain data points to realize short-term effects of TV? Or is it more long-term?
So it's both for us. We've spent a lot of time proving the long-term value of television, and then one of the harder things for us has actually been to prove short-term value, right? So we fundamentally know that TV drives acquisition. I think the hardest thing that we struggle for is the measurement of it, right? So part of the reason we can convert online, absolutely, but I can see the numbers so quickly. We can't see the same level of detail on our TV buys or any of that type of stuff as quickly as we can see the digital data. So that's where the conversation gets really hard when we're posting on campaigns quickly, having conversations relative to sales results and needing to change things for the next quarter. And we're sitting in front of people and saying, maybe I can show you in 3 months how our TV did, how our TV performed. So that's where our conversations are, but we believe in it strongly and use it significantly. We're increasing our investment there. It's just, we're struggling with the measurement piece and the real-time measurement piece of it.
Great. Justin shared some research with us, the Les Binet, Peter Field research on the short and long-term marketing strategies, one being the brand building piece, and then the sales activations, DR piece. According to that, so the paid search and email seem to be the most effective sales activation channels. Is there a way that we can make TV and search work together even harder and better, and how we could optimize TV? Anyone have any ideas on that?
Certainly what we see is that, depending on where you are in terms of brand building versus trying to drive conversion immediately for a credit card acquisition or something like that, the strength of your call to action and your creative is going to translate into how much action you're going to get on the web. The lion's share of that traffic is going to come through 3 places: direct to your website, through organic search, or through brand paid search. And it's important to make sure that you're bidding on your own brand so that others aren't stealing traffic that's being generated from your TV initiatives. As far as email, to the extent that you can capture an email address on your homepage and begin a dialogue with a prospect and convert them over time, all of these pieces have to start working together. And surfacing up the metrics associated with each of those and understanding the interplay of your multi-channel strategy is an important piece of driving your optimizations.
Right.
Yeah, just to touch on that, completely agree. So, when we invest in TV, we see lift across all of our channels. So there's a real relationship there, and the more that you invest, or we've seen the more that you invest, those channels do lift. I think, the relationship between those channels and looking at us being a massive company where a lot of these channels are actually quite siloed in terms of their management, something we're working a lot more towards is being more cohesive, because you're using something like TV or digital video or any of those channels to really build your brand, be top of mind, create those memory structures, and then as you're moving down, you obviously want to be present. So that cohesion between your brand and the messaging within all those other channels really need to work together, so that you're not kind of disconnected all the way through.
And that will be different for every category and every brand, because each one has its own unique challenges. And so I think it was Jan said, we need to start from insights. I think that's really important. When we think about our communication planning purchase journey, we think about what is specific to this category and what is specific to this brand, and does it need more of an investment on a priming basis, or is this really about activation, or of course a combination of all, but to what degree and what kind of mix? And that's really part of the craft of planning is trying to get that mix right.
Perfect. Great. Melissa, Lauren?
The only thing I was going to say is I think we talked about this a little bit, is we are really trying to, it's not about how TV can help search, it's about all those channels, right? And how we're using the right mix. So we find not necessarily the more channels that are in the market, but the right channels for the right product has the full amplification perspective. So we can't, like you said, Marianne, we can't discount and just sort of think of every channel in isolation. And I feel like we're sometimes pitting the channels against each other. And so they're getting my TV money and they're getting my digital money. And we all have to think sort of the bigger picture, which is a simple thing to say. I don't think we always do it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely a hard pass on the search part of the question. I feel like we're dancing around the fundamental issue. It's a TV conference. Right, so there's TV companies in the room. They have large businesses, mostly driven by ad agencies, and there needs to be a much tighter integration between the buyers and the sellers, right? And what we have today is these systems, and I'm a systems guy, so I always gravitate back to that. But to me, that's the number one blocker. That are hardwired, they're closed, and they're hard coded for specific things. And so when you make them try to do other things, like use data, for example, those systems start to break down. And so the world of the media owners really need to step up, and a lot of the bigger ones are doing so, and they're starting to look at what do we need to be successful in scaling both branding and lower funnel activity. And what we find is that other industries have solved this problem already, right? So you can call it, advanced advertising and lower funnel and all these different product names that we have for the advertising community. But the reality is it's not the first industry with a broken supply chain of legacy systems that are across different transaction platforms that don't talk to each other. The retail industry already went through this, right? Where companies like Amazon were starting to eat their lunch, like a Walmart, who had fragmented supply chains and old on-premise monolithic reservation systems, 1.0 websites, and they were getting killed. And so they brought a lot of data scientists in, they brought cloud-native platform people in, and they aggregated their supply chain, and they started to compete with Amazon. And Walmart stock is at an all-time high. So the point of all this is that there's a lot of people that say that TV's going to fail and digital's going to eat their lunch and all these things, but the reality is premium always prevails, always. And I feel like the conversation we're having around increasing media effectiveness is putting the cart before the horse, because no one can buy this media at scale from TV, the platform, or any given TV company. And I know Expedia is doing deals, and that's all great. Those deals are happening, but to do it at scale, there needs to be this fundamental shift where I can accommodate. And I think this was talked about in earlier sessions. One place where media owners can keep control of all their inventory and then decide how they want to sell it, what measurement type they want to use, because anytime someone switches the card in the deck, the campaign's a failure and no one ever comes back.
Right. It was actually a good segue to the absolute next question, which was you probably just answered. What was the priority developments that needs to be made for the TV industry, for Canadian media buyers to find more value? Priority developments for moving forward. What do you guys think?
I mean, you did already answer it. Everybody has to
That's
work
one of
together.
them, systems.
I
Yeah.
have a second answer, but
richer and quicker data.
Yeah, work together on it. We don't want to be working with, like, all that inventory needs to be sitting in one spot. It's very difficult for us to go and speak to all the broadcasters at the same time.
Oh yeah,
Right?
can you imagine a single platform where you could
Yeah.
manage reach frequency across all of the available inventory?
Yeah.
But I think the future of the agency, there was the name of that panel was fun. What's the point of the agency, right? And it was an interesting panel, but I think the reality is, like, now more than ever, the agency and the media companies almost need to be this single product. So, like at Wavemaker, like, if you were super tightly integrated with all the big media companies, and I know that's like a big initiative of yours, and you're making a lot of waves. We talked about it in the green room, right? Got to integrate with MediaOcean and the buy-side systems, be super connected. That is in and of itself a walled garden opportunity. With that, an agency all of a sudden has something that nobody else has, where a brand can go directly to Facebook and buy a ton of audiences without an agency being involved. But if the agencies and media companies together figure out how to unlock this one-stop shopping opportunity in television together, well, now we're gonna be talking about how we increase the effectiveness of campaigns that are running for a long time. Because just like branding, it'll be impossible to pull it once those dollars are captured and TV starts to grow. It'll be impossible to pull those dollars out, in my opinion.
But with the proliferation of AVOD services and as streaming gains more and more traction in the Canadian market, that's only going to get worse. It's moving in the opposite direction from a consolidated buy platform, right? And the number of places you can consume the inventory from is becoming more and more dynamic.
Right, but complexity should be used as a competitive advantage, right? So if I'm launching more content and advertising is going to come with that, then I have now a broader portfolio, but the problem is I just made it that much harder to go get it. And I think that's the fundamental issue is bringing those supply chains together into that single place where, because we were talking about a little bit about this too, is, media companies are afraid to change, not just because they don't know how to change. They do know how to change, but like any legacy business, they don't want to stop the gravy train, right? So there's only so much investment that goes into becoming, to offering more advanced options on top of that legacy business. So long as people are willing to pay high rates for linear TV, then they're going to keep doing that. But that doesn't mean
I would argue that is true for almost any industry.
Any industry.
Right? You think about the level of disruption that every industry has experienced, in the last 10 years, possibly starting with travel.
Yep.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think what will happen, to your point, David, is that as you get new AVOD entrants who are making their inventory available with scale, that's when the industry will be truly disrupted. Because we have been having this conference for at least 3 years, maybe 5 years.
4 to 5.
And truly there has not been that much progress in terms of addressable television in that time. There's been some, but for true addressability, not enough to be buying it at scale yet. What is it that needs to jumpstart that process? Probably a level of disruption that we're not seeing today.
But that's going to take time, right? The media owners are either resistant or, large, and it takes a long time to move the direction of a large entity. But in the interim, there's a lot that can be done, right? Can you get spot logs faster? Can you get more rich information associated with those spot logs? Can we do something from a measurement perspective with linear? Then the next question is, okay, we've measured it. We want to drive optimization. How quickly can I act on that information to change my campaign strategy mid-flight? Is that feasible? Can the broadcasters accept something outside of 80% of the inventory being sold up front, and where's the opportunity for a middle ground before we're in a 100% addressable environment?
I mean, you're right. Even reporting itself, right? I mean, reporting is so different between digital and television, even in the way that it can be brought into a dashboard, for example. It makes it very challenging.
Well, they're doing it now, and I mean, I've seen more activity in the last 2 years with the mega mergers taking place, and every bit of content that's splintered somewhere, everyone needs to find a way to monetize. You know, Apple, you know, launched the free TV service for a full year today. You know, if they copy a playbook out of the Apple News, which they did with publishers, then that's something the TV companies are going to be able to monetize and use that data, because Apple is different than a lot of the other companies who might just want to take your content and sort of cut you out, and, you know, like a Google, for example, right? And, you know, long term, you've got to watch your back. So, you know, I think they're doing it. I think everyone's starting to hire, you know, how do we preserve the linear business, hire digitally focused CTOs, and get the right people in here that could start helping us think about the future. I think it is all happening, and at the same time, they've started to figure it out, like, wow, our existing foundation's a little broken as well.
Right. Are there any other developments that you guys think? We got systems, getting data faster. Anything else you guys think would be valuable as a buyer?
I really just think it comes down to the measurements, and that honestly is the data availability that we've talked about. I mean, each of the larger companies are doing amazing jobs in their own right, but I think the common thread is really just that, you know, consistency across and availability. And I don't know that it needs to be one platform that we can buy off of. I mean, you know, working with each broadcaster individually or each media owner individually it makes no difference to us. I'm happy to do that individually. I think it's just that back end consistency in data availability, so that we're able to make those decisions, you know, a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So Grant, I mean, maybe useful to hear an example of measurement. Like what type of measurement are you seeking? Like, do you have an example of like what great looks like?
What amazing looks like, and I'll use our US as an example because that's fully available, and how we're using it is taking, you know, one-to-one set-top box data and matching it with our customer transaction data. So that's not something that we can do fully here in the Canadian market. And you can, you know, work with each different media owner and, you know, build models, if you will, and try to kind of figure something out that makes sense. A lot of the broadcasters, you know, they have the data and it's available, but it's just not available across all. So you're kind of working in a vacuum at that point. And so if I, you know, do some kind of measurement model with just one media owner, I'm buying across the entire country. So who's to say who's viewing and who's transacting if I'm only able to kind of do this with each individually, whereas in the US it's completely open, so we're able to kind of track all the way through, and it's a lot easier to make those decisions and do testing, so test and control, and actually divide up audiences and data, which is a bit more fragmented in this market. So to me, that's kind of where I'd love to see the industry go in terms of like full data availability, set-top box specifically.
But even in the near term with linear spot logs only, we worked with a company in Canada, direct-to-consumer DNA testing company, and over the course of a 5-week campaign, we're able to reduce their cost per response by 33%, which translates to a 50% lift in sales, right, at steady media spend. So the information can be leveraged currently. It's just that there needs to be more adoption and acceptance of what you can and can't do with the measurement in today's environment. And the more people that start measuring the efficacy and begin to demand that information, again, more rich information more quickly, then these things will start to change, and you know the broadcasters will evolve.
Would more collaboration between the media owners help show performance or efficiencies with you guys? So maybe it's the getting set-top box data, but do you have any other examples?
And the set-top box data isn't even really the media owners. In some instances it is, in other instances it's really the cable companies, which sometimes there's vertical integration and in other cases there's not. And they're all regional, back to your point about trying to get that view of the entire Canadian consumer. So yeah, I mean, if we could unlock all of the set-top box data and have it available in a single database that we, you know, was actually really, I think that would be
valuable.
You know, because you want to be able to use it at scale. That's the point.
Anyone else?
I mean, in the US, there's, you know, OpenAP initiative, which is going pretty good. They've started to open that up beyond linear inventory, and that's an association of broadcasters, maybe 5 networks and cable nets who have the ability to put their data segments into a pool, and the buyers can figure out how much scale they'll get from TV the platform, or at least 25% of TV the platform. So like anything, unless everyone in the industry jumps in, it's really hard to make those work. But I think it's also important as a media company and collection of media companies to sit down and really determine what is it that's really important for me to own and not share with anyone else. Let's call that special sauce. And what is it that I'm okay collaborating on, because it's obvious if I collaborate on these things, then more money is going to flow in. And I was going to say, like, my favorite example of this, because I like to look at other industries, is Alibaba. And Alibaba is a SaaS company who provides technology to help brands who want to grow in new markets. So like Nike wants to go to China, they don't know how to sell in China. Chinese people won't buy your products unless it's through a certain pay system in a certain language, and I got to be able to talk to my friends while I'm buying in a social chat setting. And so Nike scratches their head and say, how do I sell? Well, I could go to Amazon, and Amazon could do it for me, but Amazon charges me 20% and might wind up selling sneakers, and then I'm screwed, right? Or they can go with a SaaS provider. So Alibaba steps in and says, yeah, we'll provide the storefront, we'll provide the pay system, Alipay, AliExpress, all these other things, and boom, Nike grows like a rocket in China. And so everyone follows suit. And so I think it's, tech is going to play a major role, and there's many tech companies here in Canada, in the US, really all over the world that are trying to focus these things, but the media companies have to figure out, what do I need to, where does everything need to be the same, and then how are we going to differentiate, and how are those things going to, connect with each other?
But you could argue that the differentiation is the programming, right? So it's actually, and you said it before, premium will always win. So what is the content that is going to drive viewers, which is then going to allow me to monetize most effectively? In many ways, that is the special
by
sauce.
default, they're already differentiated. And you could add, data to the equation and things like, AI and machine learning. And those things are going to be really important because, if you want to buy more set-top box data, and the media companies, until they can figure out that they can give you a spot, which is measured by a rating, and, call it a set-top box segment, and know that they're going to make more money or as much money off of that than what they could have sold it for a rating, they're not going to do it. And that is the problem, is that yield. So I think optimizers play a role, and that type of control also I would consider special sauce. Anything that helps them be more competitive with their inventory or to help the buyer's products perform better, I think is all special sauce. But agency integrations and measurement and those types of things are all for the common good, right? Looking at the APIs and the data segments and trying to standardize those, I think could only be a collaboration opportunity.
If every advertiser has visibility into the efficacy of their media spend and can translate that into some KPI or some metric, a cost per visitor, a cost per sale, they suddenly can translate that back and say, okay, I know what I can afford to pay for inventory on this network and day part. And as soon as everybody understands that, then from the media owner's perspective, the person who can afford to pay the most is going to stand up and pay the most. So this does translate to yield management in this ecosystem where there is, more transparency and more measurability happening on a global basis.
But it only works if you're getting that measurement feedback. And I think the challenge is that you're getting linear optimization, which you're right, is about increasing yield in many ways for the media companies, but you're not getting the feedback loop as an advertiser to truly understand what's happening. You provide that.
Right.
And that's the missing link. But from a media owner perspective, it seems to me that to be able to provide that additional visibility would really would improve the value of that linear optimization.
In the US, we actually just launched a partnership with Comcast where we're powering a platform that they have called Instant Impact, and they're enabling all of their local market ad sales teams to go out to local advertisers and render performance dashboards in conjunction with their with their ad sale initiative. So these conversations are evolving, and this is happening. It's early days.
Caveat though, right? Because they're a cable operator who has a business built on impressions. So, selling down to the person only helps them, whereas for the broadcasters, I think it's a bigger, that's the 80% bucket, at least in the US, right? They get the 2 minutes.
Get the 2 minutes.
Right? You get the 2 minutes, it's my 2 minutes, I've got the data, I'll do whatever I want, and I'm going to cram as much into that jar as possible by person by person.
Well, and that's the challenge about comparing us to the US or even the UK, is it is a fundamentally differently structured system. So if we think we're going to follow exactly the same path, that's unlikely, because it's not structured in the same way and the incentives aren't set up in the same way. So, follow the money.
And I think the bigger broadcasters have that opportunity. Like if you look at what Sky has done in the UK, which is a little more similar to Canada than the US, where all the inventory is kind of bought at one time in a way and then slithered out, right? All the audience is kind of sold up front. I think that when Sky created AdSmart, a lot of other media companies were like, we need that.
Right.
And I think that's something that can happen here too.
But it was a vast investment.
Yeah.
So, the question is, do we have that appetite in this country at a time when, television is challenged but not in crisis? Is that an investment that they're prepared to make when there are so many other competing priorities for these companies?
Sure. AT&T made it, and they just got slapped on the wrist for it. How are you making such a large CapEx investment in something that's only 5% of our revenue?
Yeah.
But I still think they're going to do it because the subscription business is declining in a lot of ways, especially for these large cable companies. And so content will all of a sudden, slowly but surely, become king again. I don't think a lot of the telcos realize that yet.
Right.
Or they do, and they're just waiting. Or they do, and they made the wrong decision to buy a company that maybe they shouldn't have.
Or we're not at the tipping point yet, right? It's not crisis time yet.
Mm-hmm.
So digital's obviously taken a huge share of the media budget over the last couple years. Any other processes or technology or maybe business changes that could help kind of take some of that money back to the TV system and out of the digital ecosystem?
I think it's honestly what we've talked about.
I know.
Already. I think we kind of know what that shift would be. We kind of having the benefit of seeing what we have in the US and what we've built just proprietary wise in Canada to measure TV. We've made huge strides to invest in TV. TV is not dying, especially in this market, and I think that it can only develop further. The power in TV, everything we heard this morning about digital, and there's 100% benefit in digital, and we use a ton of it, but the benefit of TV is so massive that there's just a couple of pieces that we need to get in place, and investments will shift back and skyrocket. There's just no reason why they wouldn't if you can prove out the same way that you're proving out your other channels.
Sure.
We're just not in a place to be able to do that that perfectly aligns with specific advertisers' needs from an objective or what effective looks like.
So if I could just double click one level further into your question, maybe hear from Melissa and then maybe back to Mary. Like, what does your pie chart look like now, and how big is the sliver of television? And what's blocking it from becoming bigger?
We're trying to make the pie bigger, to be honest. So we see significant, and so I said we do play the brand, right? Like, so we have CIBC brand. We've got a lot of credit card, like whether it's credit card products or mortgage products. We are fundamentally trying to push more money into the TV space, more traditional space. I believe, like a lot of advertisers, we've actually potentially pushed too far into digital. I think one of the things that we struggle with, though, is when you're looking at, it's been relatively volatile in finance for the last little bit, and if, when you're looking at results quarterly, the lag and the lead times to actually impact. So let's just say, hey, Melissa, I have $1 million I need you to spend, and I need you to spend it by the next quarter. It's not as easy to call up my TV partners and say, hey guys, I got to get
Raise
you
your
out
hand
there.
if you could take her million.
Yeah.
That's like
That's a classic. That's a classic. That's just not, and it's a terrible thing to say, but it's a lot easier to execute that. Now, mind you, we are doing our programmatic in-house, right? Our search is in-house, so a lot of it too is using our own data. There is a significant benefit to there, and one of the huge benefits is just suppressing people that don't need to see our credit card advertising. So, but I would say, I've gone in a big circle, but I would say, we are definitely believe in the value of TV and trying to get there. We spent a lot of time selling it through internally. Our marketing models have proven it for us. We're doing, for some brands, we do some TV attribution models, and then now we're actively looking at trying to get into the more real-time sort of TV attribution. The one thing I did want to say, though, back to your point about linear television, we're not in a crisis mode now. I think where our heads are at is we might not be in crisis, but what if 18 months we are in crisis and we don't have anything to fall back on? So a lot of our time with our agency is spent on, okay, so what are the little pockets that I can test in? Knowing that I might get acquisition from Banking Center, knowing I might get acquisition online. What are the little pockets that we can help to prove? Should there come a time when we are struggling in that space, right? Because we believe in it. I mean, we can't just say it's going to stagnate, right? Or it has plateaued. Like, there may come a time when we are all in crisis, and we don't want to be caught on our back foot, because then we're not selling anything and we're not meeting the business needs. So, yeah.
Sure. So in the last couple panels, there's one debate around the sales activations, kind of short-term DR type marketing and long-term brand building. That Les Binet and Peter Field placed a lot of emphasis on longer-term brand building for profitability and growth and sustainability of a company. If they're right, and that is the assumption that is actually the more favorable ones, which media channels precisely could win or lose some of the budget for sales activations? Like, could you use TV for DR type branding, or how do you guys use it?
I think you can use it for both.
Yeah.
To be honest.
And I don't. Yeah.
It's really the way we kind of always say, it's like, why Expedia and why Expedia right now. So there's the brand, and then there's promotions or activations or specifics you might have from an offer standpoint, and they can both be used. I think what we've talked about in terms of new developments, like an addressable capability, that to me really feeds into more of that DR space, and where's that appropriate use, and what are you using with that? And again, it comes back to the measurement and what's that feedback loop to be able to look at, evaluate, do I want to invest in something like that, or do I want to kind of stick with the tried and true? It really depends. But I think it really comes down to your objective for each and how you're managing that. And we talked a lot about media planning and understanding the role of each of those channels. I mean, that's the marketing 101, and that's one of those I think rules that are never really going to go away. But I think it really depends on what you need to achieve.
Sure.
And what channel is going to deliver that, because it's hard to say what's going to eat another one's lunch unless you have like a really clear set of objectives and what's delivering on what.
I mean, I would build on that to say, I think what other markets have found with the sort of rise of addressable television at scale, is that you get kind of the effect that you've seen with Google and with Facebook, which has really democratized advertising for a lot of smaller advertisers who are just want to speak directly to their market.
Sure.
Addressable television allows television to become segmented in a way that it can be used in that manner. And I think right now that's less accessible to a smaller, more local advertiser, just because they can't buy regionally or as targeted as they so they turn to Facebook.
Sure.
And so that's and there's lots of inventory there, and it can be segmented in such a way. I think if you think about what is a change for linear television, bringing in or any television, bringing in a whole new set of advertisers who haven't been there previously, that changes the market dynamics from a demand perspective.
Yeah,
Lauren,
I think there's a lot of money being left on the table in that bucket. And that brand survey, all of them say there's a certain split, let's call it 70-30, where brand to lower funnel, some sort of scenario. But I think a lot of the DR money that's in TV is not sold in an integrated way with the rest of the brand buyers. I think there's a huge opportunity to have that one-stop shopping, because once that happens and the agencies and the brands can sort of turn the knobs and say, I'm going to look at how my campaign's performing when I can do this. And I think the only way to get there is the movement towards cloud. And I think that the media, Dave Morgan, who was on stage earlier, said, what is the most exciting and the most terrifying? The most terrifying is like TV's in love with their own product, but the most exciting is it's so under-optimized, there's so much opportunity. And so if you look at the P&L at any media company, there's so much opportunity to take out costs. Like if you think about these playout centers and content systems and ad sales platforms, all legacy, all on-site, all with huge fees getting paid to Oracle and all these other people, that doesn't need to happen anymore. There's probably $50 million in everyone's business of leverage where you could actually start to think about how do you take that out and move towards cloud, and the movement towards cloud sets you up for unifying your supply chains and getting closer to that single platform. And things like pilots are really, really useful for that, because the last thing a television company wants to do is rip out their infrastructure overnight, but you can slowly do it because of microservices and some of the tech that's available that media companies are now just starting to understand, because they brought in the talent, which we talked about earlier. So I think pilots and all those things, but I think the movement to cloud, you have to have a next step towards a full cloud environment across everything that supports the TV business, or you're moving backwards. And I think that's how you become that one, closer to that one-stop shop.
Is just the last question. Obviously, the last couple of years this conference has been happening. It's been a big trend of TV, big broadcasters, and then some digital channels that would come in and say, oh, we can compete in the same way and we offer the same kind of thing. Obviously, in the last couple of years, it seems to be thousands of scandals and frauds and fabricated metrics and whatnot. Have you seen a shift for the brands on stage, or some of the brands that you guys work with, more value placed on television, kind of re-looking at it again as a channel, like, oh, let's take a closer look at this as to, where we can kind of reinvest some of that digital money, or is it kind of the same?
We approach brand safety very, very carefully, and we have a number of systems and processes in place to ensure the brand safety for all of our advertisers. And within the digital landscape, that it's brand safety, certainly. It's viewability, it's fraud-free, and it's also taking into account the tolerance of the advertiser for the type of context that it might be in. Some are, Disney safe, and others might be more comfortable with, more adult content, not adult content, but a little more adult content. So we try to measure that because the available inventory is, negatively impacted by the restriction of brand safety. So that is a process that we go through with all of our clients to ensure that we're hitting the right mix for them, and we make sure that they understand exactly what our processes are to ensure that.
Okay.
So does that take it away from digital and make television? Certainly television goes through that same kind of process in terms of the content.
Right.
And so, we do it for both.
Okay, cool. You guys see that as more of an interest? People are now kind of scared of digital a little bit more, so they're asking more about what they could do with television, or?
I don't know if it's like, I think everyone's well aware of, some of the pitfalls of digital and a lot of kind of what was presented this morning, but I think there's more to that as well. Even just from a measurement perspective, from like a pure incrementality standpoint, there's still some questions around even just the measurement around digital. So we talk about measurement TV, we talk about, I think measurement across all channels really, and at least from our perspective, we're huge into TV. Globally, it's the number one channel we invest in. We believe in it, and we've done a lot of work to be able to measure it and justify why we invest in it so much. But that's not to say we don't invest in digital as well. But there was a point where we were shifting budget out of digital into TV. There's numerous reasons for it, everything from brand safety to just understanding fee structures and something like programmatic, really understanding again, measurement from a pure incrementality standpoint. So there's a couple of areas that we look at and what kind of dictates how we shift. I mean, with the rise of OTT coming, shifting audiences back into streaming digital, and God knows what else is to come and start stealing audience share. I mean, I think just being really aware of all of that and really just drilling into all of the kind of not so fun nitty-gritty back-end details and really truly understanding it, because that's, at least for us, what has really shifted where we see investments coming or going. We're now, shifting back into digital a little bit more because we've done a lot of work in that space as well. But I think it really depends on what's happening in market, what's available, and again, what you're comfortable with and what you believe in terms of, again, what it's delivering back to your business.
Right.
I think the scrutiny's on every channel, though.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not TV versus digital, or it's the scrutiny's on every channel, right? Show us the efficiency. Show us the premiums are worth the cost. So I know we talked about agency compensation and pulling down CPAs and things like that. We are looking at CPAs from a profitability standpoint. So it's not, for us, we don't want to pull money from anywhere. It's just we are trying to figure out which one works the best for us to help us the most.
Great. Well, that concludes the panel. Do we have any questions in the audience for the panelists?
People were really quick to raise their money for the $1 million.
I know.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna take that.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Grant. We talk about pipes and platforms an awful lot, and not enough on creativity. The recent Nielsen study out that creativity adds something like 47% to campaign effectiveness. And we've been doing this sort of creative carousel at a lot of our events around the world. They prove to be hugely popular. We have a fantastic collection of creative directors here today to talk about creativity and how that adds to to brands' growth and sells products. And leading that, we've got Catherine McLeod, who's the CEO and president of Think TV. Let's give her a big hand as she closes out the conference, ladies and gentlemen. And play the music. Can you play the music?
No one? Just me? Ladies?
A special dress.
Come on out.
Oh, we're on.
Nobody's told us to go out.
Oh. Lovely. Well, this seat goes far back. Yeah, I know. It's like, I know. You gotta kind of sit on the. Let me move my bag.
These are very comfy coaches.
It's in the right order.
Hello,
Yeah.
hello. Hello. Is my mic working? It doesn't feel like I'm on. Am I on? No, I'm not on. I've never been on. Oh, okay. So we'll just wait here. Is that better? Good? Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, and thank you very much for staying. We know, we are all very much aware that we are the only thing standing between you and your drinks. So we're going to make this entertaining and fun. And I'm very grateful that we have
Pressure's on.
such an esteemed panel, such an accomplished group of people to share the rest of the afternoon with. I will start by introducing everyone. To my left, I guess, to my left is Denise Rosado, who is the CCO of BBDO. We're going to go through this a lot with all the acronyms. VP Strategy at is Richard Fofana. Loranda Martin-Evans is VP and ECD at Dentsu Boss, Canada. And we have Ari Alkabi.
Got it. Nailed it.
Nailed it. Hashtag nailed it. ECD at Wunderman Thompson in Canada. And finally, rounding out this fabulous group is Brian Murray, the CCO at Ogilvy Canada. I encourage all of you, if you want to feel completely inadequate in your lives, to go and look at all of their LinkedIn profiles, and you will realize you have accomplished pretty much nothing. Anyway, so thank you all for coming today. I'm excited about this group because it's our chance to really look at how powerful creative can be and actually see some great work. So I'm super excited about that. So let's just start with a quick question, which is, we here go to a lot of media conferences and we talk about, programmatic, and we talk about digital versus television, and we talk about this versus that. How has the last 10 years impacted the creative side of the business? Denise?
In some ways it's kind of flipped from when I started. So I started a long time ago. I was very, very young when I got into the business. And it used to be TV was like the king, and everybody wanted to work on TV, and clients, you had so many eyes on TV. And in some ways it's flipped now, so that TV, unfortunately, has sometimes become an afterthought. And it's almost like you're trying to match your TV to a program you're doing, which is somewhat unfortunate because each piece is incredibly important on its own. And TV has a very important, I think, part to play, and is probably the best, maybe I'm jumping in on a million other points, but is one of the best ways to portray emotion and to create brand love. So I feel that the attention has kind of been taken off of it, but I'm noticing a little bit of a shift of clients asking for it again, because I think they're noticing some of the emotional connection to their brands have suffered without having something that can emotionally connect you to those brands.
I think that's right. And Richard, you're nodding.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think over the last 10 years, if you think about digital, it was in its infancy 10 years ago, and today it accounts for more than half of our the spend in our industry in Canada. So I think for sure our media landscape has changed. We're seeing a lot of shifting around. But interestingly, when you look at consumers, I think when we talk about television and video, consumers are still consuming more, I think, video today than they ever have been.
Yeah.
They're just going to different places to consume it. So I think when we talk about TV, I think the relevance of TV and long form content is still just as important today in terms of building brand equity and driving business.
One of the things that's been mentioned to me is that, like on the media side of the business, you guys are going into pitches to be greeted by the procurement officers and the CFOs. I don't know if any of you have any comments on that. Is that really the case?
Yeah, I think it's certainly the case. I think we've all experienced that. And I think if you look back to your previous question about what's changed in the last 10 years, if you literally go back 10 years, we were in a very similar economy of what we're facing coming up, which is we were at a recession and austerity was everywhere. So people were looking at marketing and advertising and saying, well, where can I be more efficient? And the giant television ad buy was the big bullseye everyone went after. And they kind of decided, hey, is there a more efficient way of us spending these dollars? And digital, as Richard rightly mentioned, was sort of propped up maybe a little too much to deliver that efficiency without really thinking long-term about the impact of it. So I think with another recession coming, or at least I hope it's not coming, but from what I'm reading in the headlines, it's not looking too good. I think that we're going to be in a similar position where procurement people and folks in charge of the dollars are going to be saying, hey, is this the right spend, or can we just do this all through digital instead?
And I think we've had that experience on the media side. Tell me, are they in a position to make judgments about the creative itself? Or the suggested creative? Like, do you find that you're faced with that challenge as well?
Yeah,
Is anybody weighing in when they're the CFO on, I don't like that spot, it's a little too crazy for me?
Oh my God, yeah. I think you're getting a lot of more decisions made by committee now, and especially around large investments. So, maybe where in the past you used to have a CMO making that decision of where the investments are going from a media perspective, well, now he has to, or she has to run that up the line and say, hey, this is a sizable investment, is this the right thing to be doing? And
they have to back it up, of course, with, this is why financially this media buy makes sense versus programmatic or something else.
But everybody weighs in on creative. That's always the way it's been. It's you can hear me, right? Yeah.
Can everybody hear Brian?
It's not like an architect is constantly having to answer that wall is X load-bearing wall, but everybody has an opinion on creative. Every clients, spouses. So procurement is nothing new. Weighing in on that. That's a constant battle we've always had to face. There's no mad genius who just is taken at face value. Don Draper doesn't walk into the room and get his way. So that's not new.
But there is a lot more. There is a lot more too, because of the fear of risk, and because it's a hard thing to quantify and evaluate. There's a lot more focus on research, and so sometimes it's not only the opinions of people behind the curtain that often we don't even see. Sometimes that we present and then it goes away for weeks, and then we get feedback way later.
And nothing's tested more than TV.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah, because it's like an easy walk to piece together the story in a linear way.
So say that again. Sorry,
Nothing is tested more than a TV spot.
Tested more than TV. I see. Okay. In terms of their testing of it, or
put it into
testing?
research.
Oh, I see. In the research, I see what people are going to react to. Now, is TV? We've talked about this before, and Denise just mentioned this. Is not necessarily the starting point now for advertisers.
I think the starting point sometimes is how can you get the viewership or the same amount of viewers as TV without using TV? And
it doesn't work.
No, I find that question so frustrating because there's a reason why certain things get viewership. So everybody's kind of hoping for this magic silver bullet of how do you create the biggest news story in the world. I think that's where on the stage we probably all agree where creativity is hugely important no matter what medium that you're using in order to break through, whether it's TV or anything. The real, for me, economic multiplier is creativity.
Now, when you talk to a CMO about that or a CFO about that, that creativity actually drives profitability, they say to you,
I have to prove it. There's more and more research, I think, that we're all probably using that proves. I mean, you can just think about it in your own lives. What are you talking about? What brands do you gravitate towards? Just making it personal to the CMOs. I know people want to just talk about their best-selling features or their brand, but really, what are you talking about at a dinner party? Those are the brands that people love, and there's a reason for that, and I think it's creativity in the brand itself and in the way you communicate that brand or interact with that brand.
And that's an interesting point, because does that then weigh into the short-termism versus the long-termism conversation that we've seen with advertisers on the media side as well?
Absolutely. I think the best brands, or the brands we all love, have been taking a very long-term approach to falling in love with their brand. It's not just about the latest sale or the latest feature. It's very well thought out, I think.
So, Lorenda, Denise just made that point, but if you've got a CMO, as we know, that's kind of in the gig for about 18 months, has the CFO and the CEO breathing down their neck, to drive results. How does that conversation?
Yeah, it's an interesting paradigm, because it's true, if you put out sale on hamburgers, you'll get a spike on the sale on hamburgers, but it doesn't make me choose that hamburger when it's not on sale, because I haven't created a place in my heart for a reason to go to that restaurant over the other restaurant. So it does take a bit of bravery and long-term thinking, just for even dealing with the marketers who are trying to rise in their career. They're like, I just have to make my number for the next 18 months, and if I just put that hamburger on sale and put that feature out, I'll get there. But to truly build a brand and create that space in someone's heart so that they choose it beyond all others is a difficult and more long-term thinking way to go. But I'm sure that's true for advertising as it is for long-term company planning and brand building. It's hard to create loyalty in the jobs. People tend to change jobs so much now. So I could see how it's hard on their end to not just be thinking about that 18 months and their own personal career trajectory.
Right, where they're going to end up next.
I think I have a lot of empathy for CMOs right now, but I think you have to make them feel that the bigger risk, risk is not something a lot of people want to take, but the bigger risk is not doing a longer term play. So it's kind of, it's reframing it for them to understand where the bigger risk actually lies.
Which is your brand's not going to be around to worry about short-term sales after this. So we've seen that from the work from Bennett and Field, and I know they've been mentioned a few times today, that you need to do both ways. You need to have the 60-40 at least in terms of the short-term and long-term. So, which brings us to the creative and the advertisers that seem to be doing the right thing in this market. So why don't we have a look at the first spots. Lorinda, you've chosen a couple of spots from our friends at Canadian Tire. Can you tell us a little bit about those before we roll the clip?
Yeah, so I really love these spots. You know, I think sometimes people think creatives are just trying to do wacky stuff and like win awards and high five each other. And what I really love about what Canadian Tire is doing as a company right now is fascinating to me. They've created a spokesperson, which we really don't see that much anymore. But that spokesperson has fallen into our hearts, and it feels something really relatable and really Canadian. But they also have a platform where they don't rely on this one figure necessarily, and they do things that are very artful and very considered and also very emotional, and they do their Jumpstart with kids. So I think it's a really lovely piece of Canadian work that they're putting out there and film that they're putting out there that I think really connects with the consumer.
Okay, let's have a look.
Canadian Tire was the last
Shall we talk about that one first? Are we playing two? Yeah. Okay, so that one came out, that was pretty much launched, that campaign, if I'm not mistaken, but 2012 it came out. So that's already long-term brand thinking, because they've let this already run for 7 years, and I don't think people are tired of it. But they've also evolved it, and I think the next spot that we'll see the characters kind of evolved. He looks a little different because it's been 7 years. That spot in particular was so successful, and Canadians loved it so much, they made a Lego version of it, and you could buy the toy, and it did that thing we all love where it blows up online. So I just think it was such an interesting Canadian insight and a great demo, a classic ad demo. And also evolved where the Canadian Tire platform was before. We remember, I'm sure most of us remember the old spokes that they had. That I think it's just a smart and nice evolution of a way to connect with our consumer here in Canada.
Okay, so let's take a look at the next one.
So I just think they've really kept it fresh for a campaign that's got some nice longevity. Good to see that long-term thinking.
It's a great campaign, and I guess one of the great things about Canadian Tire is that it's Canadian creative, right? So much of what's going on in our industry, and I think that this is something that we have to think about, is we tend to import a lot of creative in this country, and I'm not sure it serves the advertisers or the consumers. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think I've got a thought that might not be popular with the panel. I know. Anybody else? And interesting. Yeah. I think that a critical thing for us, we're obviously accountable to our clients and trying to drive their business. is understand and make sure that any investment we've got against advertising and communications is driving their business. So I think it's around insights. And I think some of those insights, just for example, Canadians' interest in entertainment and content, a lot of that stuff comes from across the border and overseas as well. So it kind of is not an unreasonable thing to think that some of those pieces, cultural touchstones, might be outside of Canada. So I think if there's an opportunity for an advertiser to drive business by touching or capturing that kind of a zeitgeist that sits outside Canada to drive business, great. However, I think that the agencies that are here and the thinkers in Canada are often closest to those insights. So whether it's got a Canadian wrapping around it or whether it's something outside Canada, I think it can be equally effective in terms of driving results. I think we need to sometimes step away from the idea that all solutions need to look and feel the same way. So
you can use TV and digital, for instance.
TV and digital, or an amazing piece of film that might originate elsewhere if it resonates with our Canadian consumers here. If it doesn't, then we absolutely have an obligation to call that out to our clients and work with them to build a made in Canada solution.
So I think one of the great Made in Canada solutions is the ad that Denise wants to talk about, which is the Sick Kids ad.
Well, I picked this one because I think it just proves the power of everything we've been talking about. I think it's strategically brilliant to reposition the hospital and reposition the children from being seen as weak and needing our help to being strong and needing our help in order to fight the big battles they have ahead of them. But what I loved most about this campaign is I saw it, and my mom saw it, and my brother saw it, and I could talk about this campaign, and it brought the city together. And I don't think without television, the campaign would have been as powerful and as successful and would have touched everyday people's lives the way I feel that this campaign did.
Did it work?
Oh, yeah, donations. I don't have the exact numbers for the donations, but I know that it was a hugely successful campaign. And I just give the agency and I give the client a ton of credit. I know that it took a year to sell this concept through.
Right, because it is a risky concept.
Yeah.
Right, because Sick Kids had a different approach for a very long time,
Yes.
which is these children are sick. Be sympathetic.
Yes, it's not a soft approach. I think that's what helped it break through. It was a rally cry for us to all join the kids in the hospital. So I think this is a case of a client really understanding the power of creativity and the power of using film for emotion, which is really what it should be used for, because I think it's one of the strongest mediums for emotion.
I think you're right. Let's have a look. funnily enough, it feels very un-Canadian to me. It feels very kind of aggressive, in your face, and it's a different sentiment that you might think would be from someplace else.
Yes.
But it really, really works in this space. It's a terrific ad, and I've seen it a million times, and I'm still, when I hear that beat, I'm like, oh God, is this going to be okay?
If that was on Facebook, it would probably be silent, and you wouldn't even hear that music, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just so powerful that, I mean, the ad in itself is so powerful, but I think we were talking about procurement and money, and for me, it drives me crazy if we do something that isn't seen. Because to me, that's the biggest waste of money, even if you spend any amount. So sometimes it's better to spend a little bit more because it will be seen.
And it'll pay off. It definitely did for Sick Kids. Now, the next ad that you brought was an IKEA ad.
Oh, yeah. I just think IKEA always nails it. I love that they're a global brand, but in Canada, they just use television or film in a perfect way. They can be funny. They know how to use it. They're able to put their products in most of their spots or almost all of their spots, but they know how to storytell, and they know their brand so well. You can tell it's an IKEA spot when it's not. You can just always tell it's IKEA, and I just think they do a fabulous job.
And they obviously spend in Canada for an international brand. They don't just expect the creative to work in that market.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a Canadian-made ad for IKEA.
Okay, let's have a look.
I forgot I was doing this one. I don't know if we brought it. Oh, I think we took
Boston
IKEA
Pizza?
out.
On the list here.
It's a really good ad.
Can we act it out?
But
Yeah, it's a magician.
It was on TV, so you've probably seen it.
It was on TV, so you've seen
It's a
it.
little magician kid, and it's kind of a Christmas theme, but not really Christmas. It's a fabulous ad. I think it should get a round of applause, even if you don't see it.
Yeah.
So good.
Amazing ad. Standing ovation.
Standing ovation. All right, so let's hope we have this next ad, a Boston Pizza ad.
All
Who
right.
brought that?
Let's go.
All right. So, so the fast service or QSR category is pretty competitive, and I think, ruled often by price item, promotional windows. It's not a category that it's difficult to convince clients to kind of step forward. You talked about the risk of investing in equity and investing in storytelling. So this next spot is part of a campaign where there is a choice made to kind of bring some life, and rather than focus on the kind of pragmatic price, item, speed, benefits, there's a really nice, short, simple story that's much more emotive. Yet it had a tactical component to it as well. So
Okay, let's
take a
have
look at that one. So the interesting thing about this ad, I think, is from a client's perspective, they loved it because it was emotive. It was a story, and you talked about how you talk about ads that you like with your friends and your family. But in that ad, the product was featured. Each one of those frames had product in it. It underscored this idea that this is a restaurant for families. So there's all these other messages that were baked into it, but principally it was a fun ad to watch. I think that's what made it work.
And what I love about this ad actually is it kind of demonstrates what we can see in television and video, whatever the platform is that we can have a huge Sick Kids type production that blows the budget, and yet it doesn't seem like this was the most costly ad in the world to make at the Boston Pizza ad, but it delivers the same kind of emotion that you feel if you have a child that age, that they start talking and then they don't stop for 2 years.
Right.
So, you need to kind of, and any parent who's seen it gets it, right?
Yeah.
It's insightful.
And I assume it wasn't that expensive to make. The client must have been pretty happy.
The client was happy. It was hard work. Is an example of a hard-working spot. I think.
Hard-working spot, but a hard-working spot in terms of product placement, we see that it has to have so many, cuts to the shot of the label, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But that's a hard-working spot that delivers.
It
emotion.
did. It actually drove, and you'll notice that at the end there was a call to action that was part of the spot. The result of this campaign was, I think, a 15% increase in terms of donations made to the Boston Pizza Foundation, which is
fantastic.
Huge.
That is huge. That's great. Congratulations. That's great. Okay, so this brings us back to this notion of cost, and we're going to look at a couple of spots now from Mazda and some comments about what we're doing in terms of spending here in Canada versus spending elsewhere.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I think as a group, I think we all talked a lot about AdApps, and we all work on global brands. That the option is there to adapt that work from the U.S. and run it in Canada. And I would commend Mazda because I do believe they are a great example of bucking that trend of adapting. They do it from time to time, but that is not their. It's not where they start. If they are looking to achieve a business objective or goal, the answer rarely is, well, let's just adapt it and it'll work perfectly for this market. So for dramatic purposes, I'm going to share two pieces of video for you. One is a US spot, and then another video that's going to show you what you can also get for the same money in Canada.
Can you roll those, please?
So unquestionably a great spot, a high production value spot, and I think a lot of brands or folks in charge of marketing here look at that and go, okay, well, if I have to produce that in Canada, where's the money come from to do that? So the next video I'm going to show you is just a montage of a number of pieces of content that have been created by Mazda at a similar cost, and the objective wasn't to just pick up that spot and run it here, but it was to address a very localized problem or a number of problems for a similar cost. So you can roll that. So what you're going to see is, we were able to produce not one piece of content, but in fact 9 for the same price. And I think adapting work, of course, would cost a far smaller amount than, of course, producing all these pieces of content. But I think when it comes down to the decision to adapt or to create new, part of what has to go into that is a number of factors. One, I think Richard brought it up, is the Canadian market is very different than the US market. So Canadians have a different sensibility when it comes to consuming content, and the themes or maybe creative that resonates in the US may not land the same way here. And then even geographically, is that vehicle, let's say, shot against palm trees, where we simply don't have that topography here in Canada. And of course, those things come with costs as well. So adapting it into French, all these things need to be considered when you're bringing content over into Canada. So I just wanted to kind of show this as a point to be made, which is, if you're a marketer and you've got a decision in front of you, which is, should I adapt a spot? Does it make sense for me in this market, or is there a more efficient way of me creating something that is going to solve a very specific regional problem? You can certainly do that. And I think Canada's becoming a real efficient place to produce content, and I think production companies here are constantly having conversations with creative agencies about how do we create something for less or on a fraction of a cost of our maybe US or European counterparts, and they're willing to play ball with you. So there's a lot of, I think, companies out there and agencies out there that you can partner with to create something that is going to resonate more at a local level than simply taking something that was designed for a US audience and running it here.
Are these all 30-second spots?
They are, and they've all run on television. So
wow.
It's
extraordinary.
But again, I think when you're making that decision, the practical things come into play. If you've got a new car and it's a convertible, and Global says you're going to get it in January, does that make a lot of sense to run on air? Probably not. So you really do have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of taking a beautiful piece of content like you saw previously and bringing it into your market.
I'm a big believer in Canadian content, obviously, but I also believe, and we've seen it on the film side, in the talent that's in the production industry in this country.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what we can do as an industry to kind of push that. Was there pushback from Mazda to say, wow, look at this, it came from the States, these guys, it's big, gorgeous production, and what are we going to do in Canada? It's just Canada. Is there any of that, or what kind of challenge do you face that way, if at all?
I think we have some of the best production companies, editors, sound engineers, directors on the planet. So there wasn't a sense of, well, we're getting a crappier Canadian spot. They're still getting world-class work, but it's designed for a particular market. There didn't seem to be a trade-off there when it came to deciding to lift from the US or producing our own.
Well, with 9 different spots speaking to each different region, that's kind of targeting and mass all at the same time. That's extraordinary.
There's some other pros to creating your own content as well. I think we've all seen media plans where TV's on the buy, but then 1,000 pieces of social content come along with it in various proportions. So, oftentimes when you receive a singular asset from a global partner or the US, it's difficult to take that and augment it to your local media plan. But when you're creating your own content from scratch, you can plan for all the executions, all the cut downs, all the formats a lot easier, and you also learn from them. So it's a lot more difficult to do that when you're inheriting something that you didn't birth yourself.
Right. Now, if we go to our next spot, and I think this is important, and you touched on it a little bit, Ari, that there's a million executions that follow, whether for social or something else.
Yeah.
And I've heard as well that they don't necessarily follow that may in fact be your starting point sometimes with your advertising group. Now, I'd like to throw over to Brian to talk about the spot that we're going to look at and the experience there.
Yeah, so years ago, as we were saying, you'd start with this exciting TV spot that had a lot of talk value, drew people in, got people talking. And then at some point, I don't know when, maybe because Facebook is a home of conversation and people can like it.
I'm not sure that's true.
The perception came that things that start conversations potentially could live online because it's easier for people to engage there. And at the same time, TV spots, I think brands are doing fewer of them now. They're under more scrutiny. They're going right up to the CEO for approval. So things that had some talk value potentially would get pushed online, and part of like an ecosystem where you could tell a story and break it up into smaller stories. And then things that were on TV became very hardworking. I find that most things on TV now are retail, Rogers ads, Bell ads, telling you about offers, QSR stuff. So the example that I have today is in the past year we did a campaign for Hellmann's, and for about 12 years now Hellmann's has been championing the real food movement. That's because back in the day Miracle Whip and Hellmann's were perceived as being interchangeable products, but Miracle Whip is junk in a jar and Hellmann's is made with real ingredients. So
Said by an agency person representing the brand.
Yeah, well, Unilever's a wonderful company. So anyway,
I agree.
So you'll see there's two very different ways to express that Hellmann's is on the side of real food. You can have this hardworking TV spot that goes hard at ingredients, or what we did online is, well, first we staged an activation at BMO Field where we fed the crowd recovered food. It was made into meals. They thought it was absolutely delicious. Then we revealed that all the food that they were eating was actually recovered food that was about to go into the garbage. We started a food recovery program in partnership with MLSE, and all this content fell out of this. There'll be one video that we'll show you, but then we had a little mini documentary that came out of that, and then it went right down to recipes. So we built this whole ecosystem online. And the TV was just sitting over here. We didn't do the TV, but it just was this hard-working little spot.
You didn't do the TV?
No, so I'm not going to get into that.
Okay.
Let's not get into that. But it's just interesting that
But
sometimes
it didn't kind of tie in.
sometimes you'll see that TV is no longer the creative foundation of a campaign. In many ways, it's completely the outcast. So I'd just like to.
What can we do to change that? Well, let's have a look
Well, let's
at the
see.
spot,
Yeah.
and
So
then we'll
this will give you an idea of what I mean.
go from there.
So if you tested that spot, they'd go, okay, are you getting that it's made in Canada? Are you getting real ingredients? And it would probably test very well, right? The research would, the messaging is very clear. So that's the TV spot. And then online, we did something totally different. So I can show you that. This is one example. So I guess what I'm saying is I hope that as an industry we can start asking more of TV and raising our expectations of TV and including it in the storytelling and understand what a powerful storytelling tool it is. I would love if this had been more on TV because more people I know would have seen it.
Right.
Like I've got millions of impressions, but anecdotally, a lot of people I speak to didn't see it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, when you look at it, and I'm not an expert in this, but clearly what it has that the first spot was missing is emotion. It's emotion almost in every shot of the people kind of being like, oh shit, I'm eating that, like, and still happy, but still kind of like, wait.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, the emotion of seeing people who aren't eating and the emotion of people seeing that are getting the food. Like it's like one thing after another after another. It would have been very powerful on television.
They're both delivering on the same strategy.
Right.
Right, they're just executions are very different.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then increasingly I'm seeing that TV is that. Right.
Right, instead of the, well,
Instead
you're
of
seeing
so
more
much
of the
more
first,
it could be. And I feel other markets demand more of TV. I lived in the UK for 4 years, and I just
Oh,
felt that
wait a minute.
I
This
just
is
felt
like
that the work was better
everybody
there.
must be British to be at this session. I want you to know.
I feel like the
I'm
work,
British.
the TV work in the UK was not. It was not afraid. It was more a part of culture. I look at advertising as a bit of a value exchange. You could entertain, you can educate, you can provide utility, and often our TV is not giving anything back for people's attention. And I found in the UK there was much more of a give and take. People enjoyed watching the spots more. Right. They were less likely to fast forward through them. And I just think as a market we need to keep pushing to elevate our game here.
So where do you, okay.
Question, once they saw the success of the campaign online, did any client consider putting it on TV, or you can't say?
Well, the media buy was done.
It was never there, it was not there, okay.
No, like we are working on the new wave of it now.
Right.
So we'll see how it pans out.
Right. I think there's an interesting theme here, which is, what deserves to be on TV and what doesn't. And I used to work with a fellow, and he rightly said, the one thing that clients need to understand is the work that goes onto television isn't competing against other ads in their category or products. They're literally competing against everything else on television. So when you're creating content, and the Hellman's example I think is a very good one, which is maybe didn't have that same level of emotion, consumers have the choice. They can either decide to watch that Hellman spot that you just showed, or the first spot you showed, or they can decide to watch Game of Thrones, or they can decide to watch literally anything else. It's not as if we have a captive audience there. We're literally they're forced to sit there and watch your commercial. So, that does come with a little bit of responsibility, and I think a little bit of maybe the British viewpoint isn't a bad thing to have, which is respect for the audience a bit more than respect for the research results, dare I say.
I love that sentiment. I think it's so great. Giving back to the audience. I mean, and this is not heresy to say it, but I think that, again, our job with our advertising clients, in order to make sure that they're selling product and providing services that people need, we need to get that message out there in the right way, but this reciprocal thing is important because we are entertaining. We are looking to engage consumers, and that's a metric. It's a real deliverable, and I think maybe that conversation around what are our objectives, and if we begin to include some of those objectives in our KPIs, in those deliverables, then maybe we'll see more of those spots being advocated by our clients, because I think the easy thing to do is to kind of default as an advertiser, I think, to I've got KPIs, but if those KPIs are defined by volume and they're defined by awareness, and they're not defined by some of the other things that we're talking about, then naturally the work is going to go that direction. It has to do the hard-working job of delivering against those objectives. One of the things you talked about, Brian, I thought was interesting is you said, that story arc lived in a digital environment, but not on TV, and people can't talk about it. It's not part of that cultural, zeitgeist. But I think one of the advantages that digital provides, and maybe we need to reconcile this too, is that some of the content shows up in places where people actually are wanting that type of content. So, Ara, you talked about how I don't want to be lambasted by another TV spot, thanks. I want to watch Game of Thrones instead. But if I've got a spot in the context, like online, when I'm in the right mindset to ingest it, that's very powerful. I think the right context is critical. We haven't really talked about that. It's another important aspect to think of success.
And don't get me wrong, a lot of people saw it, but I would have loved it if even more people saw it.
A lot more people
Get them working
see
together.
videos on TV.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I know those numbers.
I would like to add that, Ari, you were saying you're not just competing with the commercial, you're competing with Game of Thrones. And I would add that you're not just competing with Game of Thrones, you're competing against second and third screens.
Yeah.
So the medium itself, in my opinion, has gone from, this push medium where we can just, mix the volume so loud in the ad that, mom can still hear it when she's in the kitchen. Well, guess what? Now we've got Uber Eats and we've got 3 screens. And if your commercial your piece of film isn't so compelling that I want to be pulled into it, that I want to be, when Sick Kids comes on, you can't help but watch it. And the first time it came on, the story that I hear is everybody immediately Googled it. Like that television commercial brought me in a way that I couldn't stop but put down my iPads and video games and everything. So the competition for eyeballs has never been huger, and the way we need to connect with human beings has never been more important.
So does that put the broadcasters? I've always been interested in this, coming from the content side. We as broadcasters work hard to find the best content we could possibly afford to deliver to the audiences, premium, everything that we think people will want to see. And then in the middle of that, we have commercials that aren't necessarily delivering that same kind of emotion, aren't the sick kid spot, aren't that second helmet spot that kind of grab your attention, get you in there. Is there an opportunity for broadcasters, or is this the worst thing I've ever said, to say, wait a minute, if you're going to be in our very best shows, we expect very best creative, world-class creative for a world-class show. Does that kind of help push the advertisers in the right direction, or do they just say, okay, well, thanks, I'll go to Facebook?
A big reason a lot of people have turned to Netflix is they don't want to watch commercials, because the commercials have become so bad. And one little thing that YouTube does is if fewer people skip a video, then the advertiser can pay less to show that video because it's desirable, it's good content, it's good performing content. It would be interesting if TV could implement some sort of version of that where the less it's fast forwarded, the better the rate is. Or I don't know how you'd measure it. That's for smarter people to figure out, but there should be some incentive. That would be excellent. Why not? A quality incentive.
If the audience reacts well to.
Yeah, why not?
Well, Super Bowl is such a perfect example, right?
This is
Yeah.
to get to the place where it's the Super Bowl, where people want to watch good content.
They talk about the ads as much as they talk about the game, I think. I mean, and I don't know that many sporty people, so maybe maybe there are people that
viewership for Super Bowl programming actually spikes when all the ads come on.
Yeah, because they're so well done. And I think what Canada's great at too, I know that the Super Bowl spots usually are, the budgets are quite high, but Canadian creatives, I think, are the best in the world at being able to be so clever and to use money in a certain way, to be clever enough to break through without sometimes the most large budgets. Does that make most large budgets? Big budgets. Big budgets. Without the biggest budgets. Yeah.
So then, to talk about what Brian was talking about in the UK, that you've got this cycle of people who love great creative, and then people who make creative make it great because they know, like, how do we start that whole thing? Could it start with the broadcasters? Could it start with you guys? How do we get that momentum? I'm not sure. I know that the Olympics, we get into some great creative, but what can we make big events? We've often talked about, we've talked about at Think TV, turning the Christmas into a bit of a Super Bowl.
Yep.
Getting a few brands together to say, give us your best John Lewis type emotive ad, and I don't need to see 17 product shots. I need to see content that moves people and really make something of it and get people to tune in just to watch this commercial. How do you feel about something like that?
I think we have to prove to our clients the value of TV as an emotional storyteller, but on top of that it's actually not just a storyteller, but it's an effective way to build your brand. And I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. I feel like it's coming back a little bit.
That's because we're working on it.
Okay, maybe, yeah. Well, good, yay, yay.
Yeah, I can applause for that, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I do feel that people have, maybe not audiences, but I feel like some of my clients have missed it.
Yeah. I think there's also cases where work that's performed really well in testing goes into market and then underperforms. So, there is a lot of questions being asked of the methodologies that how we arrive at the piece of creative that goes into market, and is that methodology right from a pre-testing perspective? And there's even new technology out from a post-testing perspective. I don't know if you guys have heard of brain sites, but
yeah, of course.
That kind of testing as well to sort of gauge, yes, the creative's in market, but is it emotional? Is it actually doing what you're trying to achieve from a benchmark perspective? Is it encoding? Is it getting your attention? And in a lot of cases, and we do this testing ourselves in a lot of our work, and we're trying to learn from it and make the work better with every single ad we produce. So the desire is there for sure.
Right. We've worked with brain sites as well, and we've got a lot of great stuff on our website about it. But one of the things that they did most recently, and we featured it, I think, in the last 6 months, maybe 8, was this notion of, does creative play, American creative play to Canadians in the same way? And what was interesting is, of course, it doesn't necessarily do the things that you want it to do. But also, if you look at the market, and you mentioned this, Ari, in Quebec, it's a completely different mindset, even distinct from English Canada. So it's different, and it's different again. And I think that, well, I'm happy to share that work, obviously, with you guys or anyone in the audience, but I think we underestimate just how many differences there are within Canada to the United States. It's not just about the particular hairdos of our leaders. Okay, so let's, as we talked about storytelling, I want to end with one, and I watched this whole documentary again last night, and I couldn't keep it together, and I've seen it already like 5 times, but is the storytelling that was done in the Tim Hortons away game. And this is a great example of how we can use television and digital together to create really a monumental piece of creative that works on so many levels. It's just such a great feel good. Maybe you'd like to talk about that,
Sure.
Richard.
And just for the record as well, the Boston Pizza spot was John Street. This spot is Zulu Alpha Kilo. The insight that was leveraged in order to build this spot was, everyone knows Canadians like hockey, but that kind of trope has been played out a million times already. So it was like, okay, what more can we do? And I think it was around this idea of sharing and trying to get people connected. I think we've seen a lot of research over the last little while. As individuals, we're feeling less connected to one another. We're feeling less connected to the things that kind of matter. So Tim Hortons kind of set out to help connect people, and by leveraging the insight that we feel most connected when we're sharing the things that we love. And so that was the premise behind the spot that was built. Maybe we can just roll. Have you got the whole thing?
I don't have that. We can watch the 20-minute documentary. I think
the 18-minute film.
It's a little bit warm in here, so I think we do have the 50-second spot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The story behind this film is, so back to QSR again, and I think, again, very challenging category, and the default often in that category is it's price, item, promotion. And there's a lot of discussion with a client who was bold enough, I think, to agree to have the agency move ahead and kind of build this film, this documentary. The challenge was, and not dissimilar, I think, to the situation maybe, Brian, you were talking about, there was no budget to buy a whole whack of television. So I think this is actually a really interesting Canadian solution in terms of how our industry works. We talked to a number of broadcast partners in Sportsnet in conversations with them. This is an opportunity to tell a story, not through the conventional means of getting on TV and broadcast, but working with them to figure out a way to bring this to life. So this existed online through social, through Instagram, and there's a lot of traction online. It built up quite a bit of momentum. And I think based on that initial traction, and this is interesting, maybe there should be some kind of mechanism to allow things that live online and show some robust momentum to find their way into a broadcast medium. But based on that conversation, we were able to work out an arrangement with Sportsnet. And I think the media spend on this was less than $100,000, but we were able to work with them through their assets and through their promotion and their network to actually bring this story to life and mainstream it. And as a result, it just took off and has become a phenomenal cultural event.
Really. And I can't watch it without crying. It gets to every time because Ben with Sydney, it's too much. It is an extraordinary opportunity, and I hope that the takeaway is that, from this panel is, first of all, we have incredible creative talent in this country, and we should be very proud of the work that is being done, and I agree that's an applause moment for sure. But it's also a call to our advertisers and also to our media partners to say, let's think about what we can do. I think TV, we like to say it's not about the or, it's about the and. It's about television and every other platform that you might want to see content on. At the end of the day, it's content and advertising that moves people, that persuades them, that makes their day a little bit better. And we're terrifically grateful for this great panel. Does anybody have any questions just before we wrap? We're all good?
Thirsty.
Yeah.
Can I just say one last thing? I think the biggest ad for television is actually from the tech companies. So if you look at Apple, they use television advertising in its best possible way all the time. And if you look at Google, when they wanted to get more exposure, they're Google, and they use television advertising. So to me, the tech companies are actually the biggest ad for TV.
Right. You're right. They have, they have doubled their growth in the last, doubled their advertising spend in Canada and the United States in the last 4 years monumentally. And it's, I often see that, think like Google. I'm like, be like Google. Spend your money on television. It makes sense. They know what they're doing. They're not dumb people at Google. So, get yourself some television ads and it'll work out terrifically for you. And it's true of all the direct-to-consumer brands we're seeing is they really get some terrific growth when they go on television. It all works together. The more platforms, the greater the effectiveness, and TV can be front and center and part of that and deliver the ROI and the emotion and the connection that you're looking for. So again, thank you all for being here. It's been a real distinct pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. We've got drinks outside. That does cap off the conference really nicely. And Denise, you have actually won our last bag of booze here for that comment. I loved it. It was.
But you guys paid me to.
No, I'm just kidding. Meetings, and you have people say to you, "How do we get TV audiences without TV?"
Yes.
And you win the booze as a result. That's a brilliant quote.
Thank
Catherine
booze.
for organising that panel and sharing it so beautifully. Please, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you very much.